Right, guys, welcome back to the Adam Peter Fitness podcast. Today on the show, I have Alex Cano, who has coached several world champion powerlifters and was basically has a very lengthy coaching experience from what I've seen. And kind of got him on the show because if you guys listened to the last podcast I did with Rob Escalante, he recommended that I get Alex on to talk a little bit more about powerlifting. And Alex has been following me for a while, and we had a pretty good conversation in the DMs. So just wanted to get you on. Is there anything that you think that people should know about you before we get started?
I actually, funny enough, like when people say they started coaching, like when they started powerlifting, I was one of those people that's like, oh, I'm an online coach at like my first year in, right? But I took it more seriously than the actual lifting, funny enough. But yeah, I've actually been a big fan of the podcast for a long time now, since like the be very beginning, to be honest. Um, I think you had Joe on once, and then that's like one of the big podcasts I listen to. And now you work with Joe. When you're working
Yeah,
with Joe, now you're working with what's his name, Chance Mitchell's coach.
Eric Bodhorn. Yeah.
Or no, yeah, Eric, right? So you were working
Mhm.
with the TSA guys, and then I just remember following it around that time.
Yeah, no, and that's like back around like man, that was like back in like 2021 or 2022 when I first got this started. Yeah, no, I appreciate that, man. It's been a labor of love and a lot of fun to just talk shop about stuff and kind of get. It's kind of like it makes me feel like I'm not crazy with my ideas. I'm like, oh, cool. I could be. Well, a lot of the best guys in coaching kind of have similar thoughts, which I think is always like really interesting. And the main thing I've seen is basically like one of the biggest things I've found between the really good coaches is like versus not good coaches is the good coaches have the ability to actually problem solve. There's a lot of beginner coaches, and like I started out like this. It's kind of like I didn't know what to do. Like if someone wasn't like responding to the program I gave them, and initially I wasn't as good. But now it's like my problem solving ability is way better. And I can basically I don't always get right the first time, but usually within um, it's easier if you have a less advanced lifter. The more advanced lifters, it might take them quite some time. Like for me and Joe, it's taken me like a long time to figure things out. Like bench only started like a year later after we started to work together. Deadlift started getting somewhere earlier. Well, I just figured out. I think we figured out something. But it takes time. But that's like the main thing though is like the ability to like problem solve. And I think that you kind of get it's just a better idea of that as you get more experienced. Would you say that you kind of have, you would echo the fact that beginners are pretty easy to troubleshoot for, but then the more advanced guy, it's just like very
100%, because it's
difficult?
like with beginners, you're usually looking at it's like technique, muscle mass versus more so like programming or like fatigue. I mean, it can be fatigue pattern, but it's not as complex of a fatigue pattern, right? Like it's usually you want to solve one of the bottlenecks and it's like boom, you get your next bit of progress. With advanced lifters, you have to look at many different aspects like the microcycle, day gaps, programming. Are they doing enough to even stimulate progress one block into the next? Do they have the momentum needed? Does the bar, like, is the bar feeling heavy because of programming or momentum, right? Like, you got to think of all these questions and then actually assess them and address them, or maybe all of them at once, but it's a lot more of a complex problem. I will say the other thing that I like now is that I think of it this way with problem solving. It's like once you cross, like I like to do it very extreme method. Like once I cross out, like let's say one end of the spectrum, I know that's not the answer. So I can try the other end of the spectrum and slowly get towards the middle, right? Like if I'm trying, I'll just give an example, like intensity versus low intensity, right? I could try something really intense for someone, something not intense for someone. Once I figure out each end of the spectrum didn't work, I can see which one worked better, slowly merge closer to that side, try to get towards the middle. Just like a process of elimination is the way I would look at it.
Yeah, I think something else too that's we all have our own biases, and that's why I like I kind of like the cases when I have I mean these very small changes. I think, well, this might work. Then it stops working. I have to completely do something that just completely challenges everything I believe to be true about for programming, and then it works really
Yeah,
well.
love that.
And I think that that's kind of something that something I really had to learn is that we have these general guidelines with frequency and volume that work really well for most people. Probably going to be benching around 3 to 4 days a week for most people in powerlifting. Probably going to be squatting and deadlifting twice a week. There are people who they will make their best progress on twice a week, but people that will make their best squat and deadlift progress squatting once a week. And a lot of that just comes down to you have to understand that you have to follow the trail athlete response and not what your biases might say would work best for someone. I think it becomes more. I think the interesting thing too is that it does change like what your optimal approach is over time,
Yeah.
with like the volume and the intensity. And what I've found from a lot of people is as you get more advanced, it seems to be less. Like, how can we do less of something? Or it's basically like we can't do as many like accessories and still see like the squat and bench and deadlift go up. Like how we incorporate like more intensity and to get more out of the current volume, or just like pulling back to even just like training days too.
Yeah, I mean, I was actually just talking to Joe about something funny enough the other day. I hopped on a call with him because he knows basically he talked to Powell, Agatha's coach, and then I wanted to learn about the 6 times SVD because I have one athlete who's a very big candidate for it, but he's the only guy in America who's really been pioneering this method, right? So it's like I really wanted to get on a call with him just to talk about it, but it's like that challenges my own beliefs because it's like I would never in my right mind think that somebody needs 6 squat and bench days to progress. I still don't necessarily even like wouldn't do it for deadlift yet as like in my like mindset problem solving mindset it hasn't looked viable, but the others, from the way he explained it, look very viable now, which is something just completely new that
Right.
challenges my assumptions.
Yeah. 100%. Well, I think that's something else that we've talked about in the DMs, was talking about the nuances of lats and bench press. This is still something that's argued constantly. You get people that will say, "Don't think about your lats at all," but people that will say, "You got to think about your lats and the role in bench press." From what I've seen, is that it seems to mostly depend on basically your bench press technique style. And the more wide of a grip that you have, more ability to arch, less you're going to really have to like quote unquote use your lats
Yes.
to really stabilize the shoulder girdles. That I think the one thing that I like about the don't think about your lats is like we don't really want to think about like flexing your lats and trying to like contract them, but they are stabilizing our shoulder girdle, and that is what is keeping our shoulders depressed. But if you're someone who's built like me, very long range of motion, if I don't have my lats relatively engaged or don't feel tension in them, I'm not going to be able to actually keep a good position. That's going to take some stress off my shoulder joint and my pec minor, and I'm going to be able to actually stay healthy and be stronger. So I want to let you riff a little bit on. I kind of set the stage there, but what have you kind of seen as like the role of lats in the bench press, and how do you go about maybe explaining it to your lifters?
So I go about it in 2 ways. First, the most important part is understanding the role of the lat musculature in general for bench press. And the lat really helps in the movement of the shoulder, specifically shoulder retraction and scapular retraction, right? So it's like this is exactly where you can get to the multiple bench styles, right? But it's like when you're doing a wider, more arched bench, you're actually going to a lot of scap and shoulder depression. So you're not going to be using a lot of that lat muscle. Instead, you're going to end up in an incline bench position where you're using a lot of pec, some shoulder, depending on like your grip or like where you're angled. But mostly that arch is creating like a sort of decline bench where you end up using a lot of pec shoulder, right? If you ever done a decline bench, it feels pretty similar to that. Um, while I meant decline, not incline, if I said incline there.
Yeah.
But anyways, when you're talking about a more flat back bench, you actually have to bias a lot more retraction of the shoulder and scapula, and that's where the lat really comes into play in terms of stabilization, allowing you to engage in more of that retraction. So it's like I think it's super important muscle depending on how you bench. Like for some, it's the make or break muscle. And I actually think it's more important that the muscle is strong and can move for a good range of motion. Because whenever I see somebody that has one lat that's tighter than the other, they often get like a very big imbalance in their bench where one arm is locked out before the other, or one arm is already starting like completely slanted, right? Like the bar will
Mhm.
literally be slanted when they start. So I think the lat plays such an important role in actually resulting in even symmetrical benches, or at least even enough. No one's going to be perfectly even, but I think that making sure that the lats aren't super tight is one of the biggest priorities on bench. Because if they're tight, you're going to start with an uneven bar, which could lead to less force output, making the lift much more challenging. Or it could even lead to you developing imbalances in terms of lockout. Like you lock out one arm and the other, you can't even lock it out because your lat can't go through full range of retraction and protraction. And the other thing I think is that like people don't think about this, but if you don't do lat accessories or train them in the bench press and you always train bench in an uneven pattern, you're just going to train that uneven pattern more. So it's like doing unilateral lat work is so important so that you don't constantly just train one lat more than the other through the bench press. Because if you train that uneven pattern, you're going to end up with a lat that might be 50% bigger than the other. That is going to make your top end force output really bad.
Yeah, I love how you mentioned the actual training aspect of things for that because a lot of times like I'm as much of a fan of like stretching and doing like like these other exercises to sort of like loosen things up, but we have to remind ourselves like mobility is literally strength in a certain position, and
Exactly.
if you are not strong, keeping the elbows like at least like close to your midline, you're gonna have a really difficult time with benching and keeping like the elbows in. And so one of my favorite things to do with someone like that is is maybe has a hard time, with keeping their lats engaged or strong is really just seated cable rows or like, and then having like a close grip, like lat pull down or something like that. Really emphasizing, keeping the elbow drawing as close to the hip as possible. And that tends to help out the most. I don't dislike unilateral work with that too. Um, Especially with like, you can get a little more like a stretch on each side. Um, but I think you explained it really well there with how it really is very important if you do more of the flat back style of benching.
I think it's even important for the arch style because like that can still affect whether or not the bar starts out slanted just from like how your lats stabilize when you're actually set up. Um, I think just training them in general is not necessarily as underrated, but it's not emphasized enough, right? And I also like you don't necessarily have to stretch them because accessories, like you just said, I love that you said that, like just range of motion and strength in itself are stretching. That's why accessories are so important because it's like they literally build some of the ranges of motion that you have. Without you doing your accessories correctly, like I love the close grip lat pull down with the elbows in because that really targets the lats and it really gives you a ton of range of motion in that area when you actually go to bench. That one I found as well. I haven't like I like it. I haven't thought about the elbows in, but that would probably even help more. But I've used the close grip lat pull down a lot since I find it transfers over well.
Yeah, no. I guess like with so I guess if you were to tell your lifters, like how do you sort of get them to think about like the lats? Because I do think one of the biggest things is like I don't think we're trying to necessarily engage it. Like we're not trying to like have like a sensation of tightness like we would on like a row. But how would you like what's the feeling that maybe some of the people could like look for to know that they are using their lats properly?
The main thing is that's where I like go to the retraction aspect, right? It's like I want them to feel to retract a good bit and soften. I actually like a little bit of the softening on the unrack because when I see people protract too much, they're not going to get any lats. You have to soften a little when you unrack. That's why having the right rack height really, really matters because if you
Yes.
have too high of a rack height, you're never going to get that tiny feeling of your lat because it's like if I unrack the bar and I have just a little bit of like a hair of bend, I can actually feel like some of my lat right here. But and I also have to be emphasizing enough retraction. But if I have too high of a rack height, I'm going to be completely protracted to the point where it's like I have zero retraction and can't feel my lats. The retraction and lats are almost like happening very simultaneously, is what I found.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that's a good way to just to think about. One thing is I like doing is like I just cue elbows down towards like the hip because I find that that actually creates both like the depression and the retraction that you need
Oh yeah.
in general. It's like for myself, if I don't, like, I've seen a lot of my lifters who I always have like if they just like retract, they like, get that elevation in their scapula, and that can cause more like the front delt issues. Whereas if I say like shoulders down, I find that kind of creates that depression um and retraction at the same time
Yeah.
and pushes their chest up a little bit more.
100%. Having a little bit of depression in all the types of benches is good. Definitely don't want to have too much. At least like in a lot of the flat back styles that I've worked with for like longer range of motion styles, the too much depression I've actually seen be a bad thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
like like it ends up hurting people way too much because it's like with that kind of style, if you don't keep your elbows like a little bit more out, it's like you're gonna like if you tuck them like you would like in a very arched up bench, you're not gonna get the same return.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think that for me, if I'm thinking about like when I'm benching, I generally try to just find that balance point. Like it feels good, and like I feel like I have like that balance. It's like if you overly like depress or retract, like it will feel strange, and you will generally
Yes.
like lose positioning at some point
I actually really like
in the
the thing that
lift.
you said about the elbows out, like slightly out and down because it's like when I think about that, that's like a point where it's like you're not too retracted and not too protracted either. Like I think that would be
Yeah,
like if I were to look at like a general population census, it's like most people without too big of an arch, that probably fits into like a very generalized mold of what exactly what they need because it's like everyone needs a little bit of retraction, a little bit of depression. It's just you get these like outliers that are like yeah, have you ever seen that guy, Mr. Chestnificent?
yes,
The what is
the
it?
closest grip, most
Yes, the
protracted
close
human
grip
being ever.
Yes, but that guy, he probably wouldn't feel the best if he were to have some elbow flare, right? But like
Mhm.
he would probably feel a little bit better with some retraction. But like if we look at someone like Sean Noriega, I feel like he's never he like I've heard him publicly say, "Oh, lads on the bench, I don't think about that." It's like, well, obviously because you have an incredibly large arch, right? So it's like if there's the two ends of the extreme where I feel like this wouldn't work well, but it's like everybody else in the middle, I feel that you
Yeah.
would work amazing.
Yeah, and I think that's basically where we're kind of like leaving out a lot of people is that you get two people on the very extremes kind of yelling at
Exactly.
each other. I think my favorite example of this is John Hack with like kind of like how he controls his scapula. Because you kind of will see like, he doesn't like go like super in, but it's like it's just like he just kind of just goes in a little bit on the way down and he throws out and he's like resets and pulls his elbows down towards his hips and all that stuff. So yeah,
It's
it's
like
nuanced,
super
but
sexy sound. Exactly.
like it's something where it's like they still play a role. Obviously I still don't think you should think about it that much, but you should probably feel a little bit of tension on the way down regardless of your bench style. And if you're not feeling any sort of tension, you're probably not using your lats properly, like really stabilize your shoulder girdle and be in the best spot to produce maximum force.
The other
So
funny thing I've seen, this is the one other strat, is like I've actually had people almost because like some people when they fully lock out, they stop feeling their lats. Like I had people that were doing bench reps would fully lock out. On the first rep, it would be good, right? But once they locked out and went to do their second rep, they lost their lat tension completely, right? So I've had really long armed people stop completely locking out at the top for like higher to mid range rep sets because it's like I actually think that some of that tension and like position that you have at the start is so important to keep because in a sport where we're only doing singles, right? It's like that makes it so uncom specific. Like if you're like it's like that last inch when you like completely lock out, you lose if that's that lat in that scapula and that shoulder positioning. So it's like literally start telling people, oh yeah, just like right before you get to the top, bring it back down. Just so that we can
mm,
continue that feeling for like multiple sets.
I like that. Just doing like right BB before the top. Yeah, no. Like it's like on a single, like I will actually intentionally like let my scapula just like go like that. I don't have to
Yeah,
do
yeah,
it
but the thing,
like another rep.
yeah, exactly, and then that's totally fine. I'm just talking like I would for a single, I wouldn't tell them to not lock out. I think that's the most specific thing you're getting. So it's like you gotta lock out, and at the last rep of the set, you gotta lock out. But
Mhm.
besides that, it's like for a set of four or five, like where it's like they might be people that you're like, oh, rep strength isn't correlating at all. You might want to look at that. That sometimes can play a really big role.
Yeah, I agree. One other thing I wanted to talk about technique wise is the nuance of chest up in the squat because I think we've kind of gotten really lot into like the chest down approach and really drawing the ribs down. The main issue I've seen with that with a lot of lifters is I think that can cause excessive amounts of like internal rotation at the hip, and that can cause a lot of stress on like the lower back and the hips because you really just can't go through like the range of motion as comfortably. One of the biggest things I would tell a lot of my clients is like if they know more a little bit more of an extended position on squat feels better versus a little more of a flexed over, is how much pop do you feel out of the hole, just like with your body weight. And I tell them to like just do like more like chest up extended squat and then do like more the chest down
Yeah.
and see which one has more pop um out of the hole. It's different for everyone. But
Yeah.
I think that's a cue that has been also like people say don't think chest up, and I don't think it's a bad cue in all scenarios. So what is your opinion on that? Like
Mm.
keeping the chest up on
I
squat?
for some people love this. I'm more biased towards extension than complete flexion. But the thing is, I get a lot of people that are so extended that I have to work them in that way. So I've had to use this cue. I have to use more ribs down, like not necessarily cueing, but more so like movements that put people in that position since I get people that are like absolutely arched up. But I will say this, in the majority of cases, I think extension is better because what does extension do? It actually like shortens some of the range of motion available at the hips, right? And that's why we're talking about it. Like your low back or might hurt if you do too much ribs down because you have maximum range of motion available in that position. Like you're going to hit depths and do a little bit more internal rotation than what's probably comfortable. Whereas like if you're a little bit extended, you're actually going to shorten a little bit of that range of motion and probably be able to keep more tension in the hole.
Yeah,
So it's like
I
extension
totally agree.
itself always shortens the hamstrings, the glutes, and the hips, right? So it's like you're gonna be able to keep so much more tension versus if you're flexed over, you're not gonna be able to hold tension in those muscles completely. Obviously, you don't want to be completely arched up, but it's definitely better to have that chest up in general. The other thing I've found is that sometimes people, when they get too flexed, they get in a position where their posterior chain has to do way more work than we'd like.
Yes,
Because the
and that can cause a lot more stress on the those the hips and lower back, which is where most people get their pain.
yeah, and then the last thing is too like what ends up happening is I really like the biasing of extension in the unrack because when you walk out, lots of times you can't extend anymore or very much more. So if you're already extended and then you exhale, you end up in a lot more of a neutral slash slightly extension bias position. And
I
that
think
tends to
that's the key. Yes. Yeah. Sorry to cut you off, but like I think that's the main thing is like if you're already kind of flexed over and then you breathe out to like get the air out, draw the ribs down more, that's when the issues happen. That's what I've noticed.
100%. That's exactly what I've noticed too. Um, you need to start with the extension because you're always gonna have to exhale somewhat or get crushed by the barbell once you unrack it. So it's like, why are you trying to start more rounded than you're already gonna be?
Totally agree. Yeah, I think that it's one of those things where again like, just pay attention to like how you feel. I think like my rule of thumb of like what feels like more poppy into and out of the hole will probably work better. I also think one thing is that as you get stronger on squat, you're probably going to emphasize with more extension than
100%.
if you're weaker. Because if you look at all the best squatters, they're pretty extended because if you have 800 pounds on your back, you can't flex over. If you flex over even a tiny bit, like you
Crushed.
lose it.
Like look at Ashton. He's a really good example in my opinion. He squats with a really broad chest up and the hips going back, right? Like he has beautiful extension, at least like for most of the time when I see him squat. He's able to handle 800 pounds better than almost anyone else.
Yeah,
Christian Mouse is like great extension.
yeah. So I guess if you should have someone on the on rack, you're talking about that. What do you do as far as queuing wise to help them create more extension?
The big one is rack height, right? You can't have the rack height too low because that's often what results in a little bit. I mean, this depends, right? You have to have the rack height to where a person can almost stand up into the rack. I like to think the big one is I like people to stand up into the rack, and then I also like people to start in front of the bar so that they can actually get under it. perfectly. Usually the starting in front of the bar takes complete care of the extension because if you stand in front of it and then you have to get under it from the front, you end up having to stand up with a little bit more chest up.
Yeah, I think those are two really great points. Well, cool. I think we talked about technique stuff. Is there anything I want to talk about with deadlift, or just we just a bit bench and squat? Is there anything on like on deadlift that you think is kind of like a something that was kind of has to be like a bad cue that actually is a good cue?
Yeah, so people, what I've been seeing lately is there was this whole like craze about people trying to be as upright as possible. So recently, like I've been telling people to round their upper back as much as humanly possible because like what I think about the deadlift is like if you start more rounded, you can probably get more upright sometimes because if we start in an end range position like extension, there's no way we can move into neutral or more extension. Like you can't go somewhere you're already in. So people that start already like upright with their back straight oftentimes end up in a worse position because they can't go there. In the deadlift, you kind of have a lot of the people I coach rotate or get into that position from their wedge. So if you're starting extended, you can't move into extension, only more flexion. But if you're starting flexed, you can move into neutral. The other thing about starting more flexed is that you can't get pulled forward anymore because you're already at the end range of forward. So it's like when you wedge in, you'll find that a lot of people can actually use their hips more too if they're in flexion because it's not shortening the range of motion that the hips have. So recently, I have been super pro cueing flexion and lengthening of the arms on the deadlift.
Hmm.
That's been
Yeah,
my big.
I like that because I find that for myself with deadlift, if you look at all the best deadlifters, they do have a little bit more of that rounded back position when they do are getting into position, and then they move into that extension when they are wedging. The main thing I always tell my lifters is like, we want to maintain the distance between like ribs and the hips when we're wedging, but the upper back should move throughout the range of motion.
I like that. That's literally like a simple way to describe rotation. Like I really like that.
Yep.
The other interesting thing I often see about the deadlift, right, is like with the flexion, right? It allows you to push your rib cage back so it's stacked over your pelvis. Because like with a lot of extension, you see that rib cage come in front of the pelvis to where they're out of line and it's really hard to get stacked. So that's the other really big thing about having flexion that I like. Like even what is it? Like I don't know if you've seen if you follow I mean you definitely follow him. You know Aiden Raider?
Yeah. Yeah.
Recently I saw he changed to a more flex pull and his deadlift has been going pretty well. It's like because when you start so extended or so upright, it's really hard to create power from the hips. Just because in squat, yeah, you might want to lose some of that tension some of that space that your hips have, so that you cut depth at the perfect area and hit the right amount of tension. But in the deadlift, you're trying to open up, use those hips as much as you can, right? So that's where flexion plays an even bigger role.
Right. Yeah, I fully agree. Actually, one thing I want to talk about, mentioning with Aiden, he mentioned on his close friend's story that like he's just not going to go like very high RPEs because he starts to get like really beat up and fatigued from that. And that had me like that made me like immediately think of I have like some athletes who they just really sputter out and like certain like rep ranges too. Like if we put them like a singles block or doubles block for like more than one, they kind of just maladapt after that. And they have to go back
Dude,
up to like higher rep ranges. So I want to ask like how would you like periodize training for somebody who is very sensitive to those high intensities?
this is one of my favorite questions because I have a lot of people that only do singles, like either as fatigue singles, like the block of the meet or meet day, because I can just they just lose so much more productivity in their training whenever they do any other rep ranges besides 3 to 5, right? As a top set. And I have a lot of people like this, which is the interesting part. So it's like I think the number one thing in terms of training is productivity, right? It's like one, like how can we keep this person making progress? And two, how can we make sure that the progress continues to get better block after block? And if singles are something that stop the progress from getting better block after block, I would just not do them. I literally or just high RPE work. Like if it's high RPE work, I would literally just I abandoned this conception of block length a bit ago for some people because it's like some people they just need to train like in a certain rep range of intensity to get stronger. So it's like maybe they need to do 6 blocks in the weight that in previous fought they were doing for, let's say normally they were doing week 1 through 4, right? Well, now they're doing 6 weeks, but the weight is only increasing a small amount. It's the same weight they would do from week 2 to 3 for the whole block.
Yep.
That keeps it really productive and keeps them from not touching super heavy loads or super light loads, so they're never detrained. But they're making a lot of progress because they're touching the loads that stimulate the most progress. So my thought process was like, if week 4 is just too fatiguing, the way to get around that is just do the work that's always causing the progress, which is week 2 to 3. Obviously, at some point you need to go heavier, and that's where like just doing heavier sets of 4 or 5 may come into play. But I would literally just periodize it where it's like I might do 6. Like let's say this person can only handle at most 3 reps. They might do a cycle where they do 6 reps at the start, then they do 4 reps at the second block. Is a 4 block cycle. Then they do 5 reps on the third block, and on the last block of the cycle, the fourth one, they do 3 reps. I like to alternate it because I feel like if you stay in the high reps without touching anything heavy for too long, you lose the skill that we're after. Because at the end of the day, it's still powerlifting. We have to touch something heavy.
So it's just so I understand, like the sixes block say first off, then like sixes and like fatigue singles after, and then
I
doing it
might
like
do no fatigue singles sometimes. Like I might just do straight 6 top set of 6 on some
well, like I
days.
guess like when you mentioned like sprinkling in the top set intensity, like and having it be like heavier, like what are you how would you do that? Like
How
with
would I
the
do that? I
higher
mean, if it's
volume.
necessity, I would add the fatigue single, right? But if not, I just go like the first block isn't as it. You can still get a lot of intensity just from the rep ranges, right? But if it's somebody that absolutely needs intensity, you can add in you can definitely add in that fatigue single, or you can add in like a primer single that isn't as heavy as like a top end exposure, right? But my thing is like I just alternate from a higher rep block to a lower rep block. Like I would go sixes,
Mhm.
fours, fives, threes. Like I don't like to stay at a higher rep range for too long.
I like that. That's something that makes a lot of sense to me. Like it's sort of like a non-linear linear periodization,
Love
or at
the
least
non-linear
for
periodizing.
people.
Even for just for singles, right? Like I like to go fours, twos, threes, ones. Because if you just stay at if you go 4 3 2 1, I find that I've found too many times that it's really hard to adapt to single and keep that momentum from block to block. Because usually after you hit doubles and go pretty heavy, momentum isn't as high as when you just did threes and it wasn't as heavy.
It's funny as you mentioned that was like Marcellus always like, oh, Bob's doubles are better than his singles. I'm like, bro, my like doubles blocks are like honestly like the hardest blocks for me because it's so close to singles and it's so much more fatiguing than singles.
100%. I 1000% agree with you. I literally always have that thought process about doubles. I'm like, dude, this is harder than a single. Like I'm so much better at a single, but I'm so bad at doubles. And
Yeah.
then I'm like, and that's where that thought process really came to me. It's like, why don't I just start doing doubles after fours? Then I have the threes block to get back some momentum, and then I have the singles block to really push it.
What's been interesting with me is like I've noticed that for myself, like I always look a lot better if I have like, like like either a set of like a block of like fours or fives on and this is mostly on like my squat and deadlift. Like my bench seems to handle intensity actually a lot and is what it needs. But on squat and deadlift, it's like I have to go like
Yeah, I
five
see
four,
that.
but like I can really like I peak really fast in like rep ranges that I'm doing usually. And with singles, like I was looking at like my last meet, I was like deadlift felt like it's after like the first block of singles, just I just lost steam. Like it was just super hard to like keep going. Now with that, I was like I knew like what I had going into the meet, but like I also got like more like issues with like my pecs and like my hips and just like lower back a lot of the times with like the higher intensity work. And I just like mostly I just felt way like a lot better too. I think that's something that you need to ask your clients too. Like what rep ranges do you like just generally feel better in?
Yeah.
One of my clients, best block ever, like the best singles block ever. And then we changed nothing. And then he just like, yo, Adam, like I am in pain. Like I am in constant pain. And I cannot get out of it. He's like, why am I so fatigued? I'm like, well, I don't know. We didn't change anything. And I looked back over things and I'm like, yo, dog, I think we just can't do high intensity. And if you do high intensity, it's like for one block. And even then, it's just like, I'd rather use like a block, like a triples block to give like an idea where the single probably is. And then just like coast into like the meat on that
Yeah.
assumption.
Yeah, I'm like funny enough, I have so many clients that are the same way. Like for especially on deadlift is where I find it. It's like I have many clients that they're so polarized where it's like they can only do eights on deadlift and they peak really well on the eights, but they can only handle that like lower rep range block for a short amount of time, right? Like literally even myself, like I don't do heavy work besides like a light single once a week on my deadlift. And like obviously I don't pull like 720 like you, I only pull 650. So it's like um I'll do like eights all week because once I hit that like 3 to 1 rep range, I can only do that for one block. Like I'll do eights for like 8 blocks of the year, 9 blocks of the year, PR every time, like hit like 270, 260 for eights. And then my single goes up for sure. But once I hit that single block, I'm out of commission for like 2 blocks.
It's so crazy to me how like the difference between some people with like how good they are at singles versus like rep work.
Oh,
My
yes.
rep work is not good compared to my singles, like at all.
That is a big difference, but I tend to see it. It's like a lot of the people that have the really like snappy, hard hip extension. Like it's harder off the floor and easier at lockout is the ones that are usually better at repping things out. Definitely like if you have a more normal pull, it's balanced like your rep range translation. But if you have like a little bit of a easier off the floor, harder at lockout, it's definitely you're worse at reps, but way better at singles. That's usually what I see. Because me, it's crazy. I've done 270 for six and I only pulled 295.
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense. Versus like I think my
No,
best
no, it
set of
makes a
six
ton of
was
sense.
like
Because like the first rep is
573.
hard.
Oh, yeah, that's actually one thing I heard Nori talking about is like you have to look at like the rep speed after like the first one because like if people like are really like slow on the first one and it gets like really fast after that, like that's a big sign they're like not as good at singles. But the people that have like a really fast drop off, which is me, they're really good at singles. They're really good at maximizing that force production, um, very fast.
100%. But the reason why eights or sixes or sevens are so good for me is because I can maximize my force production gains by doing a lot of those high force producing reps versus like if I were to just do like a set of 3 or 4, they would all be slow, not as high force
Yeah, I see
producing
what you're
reps.
saying.
Yeah, so it's like if I'm doing a set of six with 270 versus I'm doing like I've done sets of three with 285 before, but it's like they're all slow, like super slow and grindy off the floor, all of them. But with the 276, only the first rep is hard, and after that, they all almost get faster.
So that's an interesting thing that you talk about, like the whole like rep range sensitivities. I don't think it's a rep range sensitivity. I think it's a percentage of your one max sensitivity. In my opinion, like I feel like if you find like that percentage that you feel good in, I don't think it matters the rep range that you're doing. I think it just matters like the total volume that you get in at that percentage.
See, I would say for some lifts, this is true. The only reason I would say it's not necessarily true for the deadlift is because of the exactly what we're talking about, where it's like you got to look at the first rep. Because it's like for some people that first rep is just so fatiguing compared to the ones that come after. It's like you were essentially like doing more work than you can actually handle by doing eights, but like that's allowing you to progress because it's like if you could only do set of three with 270 first reps, right? Like 3 sets of one with 270 as first rep, that's not going to get you a lot of progress. But if you can do 3 sets of 270 with the first rep, but then you do more reps after that because they all get
Mm,
faster, you're making
yeah.
even more progress. That's where I really think it differs. Like I think for bench and squat, I would actually 100% agree with that thought process. Really, it's just deadlift where I see that happen the most. Some people on squat, but it's a lot rarer to see that on squat.
Something that's interesting about rep range too, like if you always ask me about programming down sets, I know and Steve has like a good video on powerlifting now. Honestly, I feel like it leaves a lot off the table from what I know still, because like a big part of choosing rep ranges is like what it reinforces good technique too. For the lifter, like that's honestly what I would say is like my number one choice of like
1,000.
down sets, not just like the RP or like the percentage. It's just like what rep range like helps that per person is like, for example, like one of the big changes with my squad programming was going from a very high intensity, lower rep day, which is something that Joe's a little bit more biased to. He's seen it work with a lot of his lifters, to a very light, higher rep work day. The reason why I like that on squats is because, lots of practice, like just squatting. And this game, my hips like loose, and like the psychological fatigue is a lot lower for me doing like a set of 8 with like 150 kilos versus like, a set of 4 with like 190, even though that's probably, similar like stress
Yeah,
levels.
no, I
Um,
agree. And I'm the same way in terms of that aspect, actually. Like I literally feel with squat, it's like I would rather have the light high reps than like a set of five with like 210 or 220.
I think that's something to pay attention to as people get more advanced, especially because I think a lot of times, like our brains kind of subconsciously communicate to us like what energy system is fatigued. Because if you are like not ready to like lift heavy, you're mentally like, I don't really feel like that, like you're probably not recovered in that sense. But you're like, nah, like I that sounds like fun. You're probably recovered. I think like the brain does talk very much to the body um with that. And like just like a personal like preference for me is like, if I'm like I have to even it's just like, like a single, it's like, like I'm just doing like a 3 hour run with like 200 kilos. Like, I'm like, I don't want to do that. That does not sound
No,
like fun. Like, and I'm like, oh, I'll do
I
some
agree.
higher
There's
rep work volume.
so much validity in that because it's like some of the literally I actually think problem solving comes down a lot down to that because it's like so many clients will literally tell you what rep range is killing them and not. And then when you bias into that, you tend to see that it's right. Like people almost like it's crazy, right? But our bodies know what doesn't work and does work. And really whenever someone kind of every tweak has like I look at it this way. It's like obviously lots of tweaks that my clients have are like not tweak, but like if a client freaks out about something or like makes a comment or says that something might not work, there might be a grain of truth to everything that they say. There's always a grain of truth to something that a client says because they're paying you. They're not always trying, well, most clients I'll say. But a lot of clients, whenever they say something about a rep range or about something in the programming, there's some sort of kernel of truth to it. While it may not all be true, there's probably something in there that stems from a true feeling. So I always tend to look at when someone makes a comment, it's like, dude, this day is killing me. I think it's not setting my week up well. I think the eights are too much. I always pay attention to that.
I think acute fatigue spikes, especially, play a way bigger role than people think, which is why, like, for some people, like for me, I've been playing around with like doing the two squat and deadlift days, and like it just taints me so much more. Like, just I don't feel good. I could do like doing like two of those a week. Whereas when I separate them, I have like I have like one squat day, one deadlift day, and then one combination. I get so much less acute fatigue that it carries over to my other sessions, because one of the things that Joe really taught me that has really changed my perspective is that all these sessions need to stack on each other. And I think that's why it's important to like, like as an athlete, communicate to your coach how beat up you feel on some day, and if this just feels way harder than it should. Because if you have experience, you kind of know like how hard a day should feel. Like once things start feeling really, really difficult, that's a good sign that it's going to affect their primary day. That's actually what Pavel said on my podcast, that he actually pays a lot of attention to the light sessions and how
Yes,
those feel. Because he says if
dude.
the light sessions feel bad, your primary day is going to feel bad.
Exactly. This is something I've been paying a lot of attention to too recently, literally because of like that, like a lot of what Powell has put out there, a lot of like what Joe has put out there, a lot of the content that you've put out there. I actually think that I used to not care because like I used to be really strict about just clients reporting how they felt. I didn't care that much about the RP though. I just cared about the speed and how they felt, like good or bad. But I've actually gotten towards caring a lot more about what RP they put down. Not necessarily RP matches of what is prescribed, but what RP they put down. Because like let's say I give them like a like RP six set of squat. I'm just gonna somebody like a 52 kilo female, right? She does like a 1x2 at 140 kilos. And then like it's at six, it moves at six, but then she rates it at nine. That fatigue that she put that at nine that she puts down could be an indication of like one day feeling too hard, right? And then like she rates all the concurrent sets, like she even does like 110 for seven, and 110 for seven, like at the beginning of a block was at four, but now it's at eight. That's like an indication of the acute fatigue spikes. That's why I like RP a lot now, or at least just logging RP, I think is so important because it gives you an indication of session how hard a session is or the fatigue spike in a session.
Yeah, because that acute fatigue builds across like each set that we do. That's also one of those things about like your primary doesn't need to be your hardest training day in a sense of like the volume or the reps. Like your primary could literally just be like the day where you have the highest intensity, and then you get your in all your volume on your secondary day. Like that's completely fine to do. It just depends on how you got to beat up do you actually get from that intensity, and what's going to help you feel good going on to the other session. Because I think like once a week frequency can work, but that's like a last resort, man. Like that's like if I'm problem solving, it's like I'm gonna like even just do something like that, and then just like just do the top set here, do accessories, or like to get some more muscular stimulus. Just put your down sets on like secondary day and see if that makes you feel better. Sometimes it works.
Yeah, no, I agree. And it's just like the more I look at it, it's like I don't really care. It like I never want to have a mold for it's like primary needs to be hard or secondary needs to be easy, right? Like I just want to do what works. So it's like I always just look to see what works for that specific person and what they're reporting on that given day. Like we want primary to feel like the strongest day, though. That's the general consensus, I would say. Primary be the day where they can usually do the most weight, not necessarily have to, but usually where they feel like they can do the most weight and can.
Well, it's also really important for peaking too, because I think people are getting a lot more away from like the traditional peaking and tapering. Because for me, I basically just look at like like what do they do before their primary day that makes them feel strong, and I just do that going into their meet day, and then it always shows up exactly how it should.
You know, one other question I have for you actually is like, how do you do tapers? Do you do it like always the same time, the same based on data, or always based on that how that client is feeling in the given moment? Because like for me, I used to always do them like train in or like I've always done train in like when I first started because it was reliable. I never did like tapers when I first started, but now I do a mix of like light tapering and no tapering. Like I literally just do whatever makes sense in that moment. Because like I ask, how is this lift feeling? How is it compared to this one to our best block so far? If you compared them, what's the difference? And then I make like adjustments based on that. Like I pull away volume or I pull away accessories, like based on what they're describing. Just literally on everything we talked about, acute fatigue and just like overall predictability. I will ask questions about that and then write a taper that's almost completely different every time. Like my athlete Janae, Janae Kovacs, she just won junior worlds. Like literally our tapers for our last three meets have been completely different. None of them have been alike.
Yeah, so I typically have them be. I guess the biggest thing for me is the most variability is how much accessory work do I keep in, because I have some people who, if I take it away, it actually changes around like how the lift feels too much. Because they have like less inflammation in their, the prime movers that can decrease proprioception. And that will usually be what I first look at as far as lowering down fatigue. Is I have a pretty accessory heavy programming strategy. And I find that just programming, taking a lot of the accessory work off and then having it just be like, instead of pushing it hard, I say just go in and just get like a pump, just get like some good movement in. But typically what I do is I will take a look at, their secondary day or whatever their second to last session was, and I kind of just try to keep that similar as far as stress load. But what I do as far as changing as far as how fatigued do they feel is it depends on like, do they feel strong or not? Like, are they feeling good up to that point? If so, I would just kind of just keep building with the trends. But they're saying I'm kind of feeling beat up, I'll usually pull back intensity slightly to like the minimum dose that I usually think that they will need going into their meet day. And then I also just like I think sometimes too it's hard to trust athletes' perception of fatigue in a peak because there's a lot of mental stress around that. And I think just having the stress of like a peak and like that can just create more perception of fatigue. If there is pain present, I'll usually be a more aggressive with the tape with the taper, especially. But typically, I keep it pretty predictable. As far as do I train into the meet, as far as like lining up on like let's say like a week four, or have like a week four and then a taper. Um, I think that's the thing. Like I haven't fully like decided on it. I've seen both of them work just fine. I think it just depends on how hard are you pushing like the week four. Because I kind of like with you with like block length. I mean, you could technically just have it like be a more drawn out cycle and have your like what I would call it the anchor weight that you usually need to feel stronger. For better. I do think the one thing with that is that typically, so say if you know your peak block is an RPE 8, and then you're going to the meet, or you're supposed to do an RPE 10. I think that might make more sense having like the extra week of tapering because you have more time to build up into that heavier weight. And then usually they're going to be a little bit more fatigued from that, and they can benefit from a taper more at that point.
Yep.
Like it depends. That depends a lot on like strength level of the lifter. Because I think that was partially why squat kind of sucked for me going into my meet and why I got like a little bit of an injury, and that's like why it was kind of flat on meet day was because I didn't have enough time to really build up those heavier weights and get used to them.
Yeah, that's definitely a thing. That adaptation thing is huge. And I actually find even like some people need that time and they need to essentially hold that adaptation for a long time. Like it's like they literally, like I have like some lifters that need to be going very heavy almost every week going into a meet, or they're not going to be able to handle that weight. Crazy enough.
Yep,
It's just,
exactly. It really depends on like how much do they hold on to intensity. So like, do they just detrain a lot? And some it doesn't. I've seen it like work. It's so weird, man. Like because it's kind of just like again, like on the secondary day, like what makes them feel good, and like do they need like how like some of that like rest needs to slow down for things to start feeling good, or do they need just everything to move like really fast and poppy? It's so unique and different to every person on each lift. Um, I found like for people that are like more muscularly focused, like it needs to move a little bit faster because there's just a lot more just fatigue that they're generating with each rep. If they're more technically driven, they typically need more intensity. One thing I found really hard is the last thing I'll ask you is like I have like some single deadlifters who like they are really well leveraged. But they're also just so sensitive to like that intensity, and like it seems to me like they just need like their technique primed more than like actually like intensities. I've tried going like higher in load, like on their secondary day, like it goes even just like one single, like they just don't feel strong. Like, how do you go about like making your single deadlifters like feel really strong, like predictably if they're
so
well
those
leveraged?
those lifters that are really well leveraged but sensitive to intensity, it's like that's where I love reps. That's why I love high deadlift reps. Because it's like a lot of those lifters, they just need they need to slowly do more weight over time, but you don't want to go super heavy. For the eights, you can go lighter, or like not even just eights. I'm just saying high reps in general, like 6 to 10, right? Like you can go way lighter while also not having to go while doing enough work to set you up in terms of technique, but also not even having to get as fatigued, right? Like you can slowly add weight over time, but it's going to be a set of 10 for deadlift for somebody is going to be way different than a set of three, even if they're well leveraged, right? It's like you're loading way less and doing way more reps.
Mm.
That tends to
Yeah,
find me.
so basically it's kind of like it makes them like more flowy and just
Yes,
like
I love the
less
flow.
like tense.
Hmm. For some people, though, I find that they need that intensity to stiffen up. I almost want to look at it too. Like one thing people don't think about is like, do you need to be stiff or do you need to be open? Sometimes stiff, like you were talking about with accessories, right? That proprioception from accessories, that like stiffness from them. Literally, for some people, that's make or break in terms of intensity. Intensity stiffens them, so you need it. For some
Mm,
people, openness is everything, like on deadlift. And that's why those well leveraged people need to be like less taxed. Cause it's like for two tax, your hips get more closed off, you get a little bit more compressed, and it's harder to open up into the bar. Right.
right.
But if you're very fresh and just primed in terms of technique and in flow, you open up really well. you move the best, right? That's one
Mm.
reason why I've seen these kind of setup works.
I mean, the only other thing I've seen work well other than like the high reps, is like I've seen sometimes like just like leg work, like the day
Oh,
before, like just some like quad volume, like a leg press, and really help them feel like a lot more like connected to their legs, have the better like proprioception, not fatigue them that much.
yeah.
So
I've I've seen that work great too, because it's like the quad underrated enough helps drive the hip through. So it's like helps even more staying open. If you're trying to drive those hips into the bar or trying to essentially wedge in well and maintain hip extension, that quad is going to help with that pop right there.
exactly. That's actually why I've noticed for myself. I've like if my like my quad like upper quad is like kind of fatigued, it's actually fine. If my like fastest like medialis is fatigued, I can't go. And that makes sense with like how I conventional deadlift. I don't have as much of like knee flexion, but I'm getting a lot of that like, terminal knee extension. That's so it's
Oh,
always interesting, like what what how people need to like feel pride muscularly. But anyways, dude, this is a great conversation. I really enjoyed
yeah.
having you on. So thanks for being willing to come
Yeah,
on.
I'm glad that I finally got to meet you like for a real conversation. Been a big
Yeah,
fan for a while, man.
I appreciate it, man. Well, if people wanted to hire you for your coaching, where should they go?
Literally my Instagram page is Alex_Kano_challenge. Just like send me a DM. Yeah, but they also got you, man. So it's like they could just head over there.
Yeah, well, you just pick your. I always tell people it's the main difference between the more accomplished coaches is just personality. Get on a call with them, see which person that you like the best. That's literally what I would say. Is I think you can go very well with a lot of the more well-known
Yeah.
coaches. So,
Yeah.
all right, thank you guys for listening to this episode. I'll talk to you in the next one.